I'm leaning into the cushions of my worn couch, one hand wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, the other flipping through an old vinyl record sleeve I picked up at a flea market last week. The early December breeze sneaks through the cracks of my apartment windows in the quiet hills of Asheville, North Carolina. Outside, the sky hangs low and heavy, threatening snow but withholding it. Then, my phone rings, shattering the stillness. The screen lights up. Dad. My stomach knots. I tap the speaker, not expecting much. "Jenna, you don't need to come down for Christmas this year," he says breezily, like he's talking about skipping dessert. I blink. "Excuse me?" "It's probably best if you just stay up there this time," he continues smoothly, as if reading off a script, "to keep the peace." "Let me guess, Brooklyn's overwhelmed again," I say, already knowing the answer. My sister, always the delicate one. The one whose mood decided the emotional weather of the entire household. "So, I'm uninvited because Brooklyn might be uncomfortable?" I ask, slowly, each word sharp as glass. He sighs, the kind of sigh that means, "Don't make this a thing. It's just one holiday, Jenna. You'll be fine." I rise from the couch, wood groaning beneath me. One holiday? After I've sent over $9,000, 0 cents this year, just to keep your electric and propane bills paid? Silence. Unemployed. Yes. I'm afraid it's the only option I have for myself. I want to add a city feature to my portfolio, but it's so expensive. Honestly, does she know not the worst emotions? Unemployed, angry? "Don't drag money into this," he says at last, a little defensive. "You offered to help." I laugh, a bitter, empty sound. Offered? When the power got shut off in February and Mom called me sobbing, who paid it within an hour? In May, when the AC failed and you said Brooklyn couldn't sleep without it? Me again. And in October, when she drained her savings on that failed candle business? I covered your heating oil. He doesn't argue, just retreats behind the same tired excuse. "She needs calm, Jenna. She's been through a lot." "And apparently," I mutter, voice flat, "I'm just the utility company with no seat at the table." I stare through the fogged-up window as snow begins to drift from the darkening sky. Small flakes swirl and settle on the pavement, slowly covering the walkway outside my apartment. "I've been through a lot too," I whisper to no one. But no one ever paused the world for me. Dad's voice, still echoing in my head, had tried to stay calm, almost bored. But I heard it, that flicker of annoyance. "Don't make this awkward. It's not personal." I gripped the table's edge until my knuckles paled. "Then don't expect another dime from me this winter." And I ended the call before he could say a single word. My finger hovered over the screen until it went black, just like my mood. Outside, the snow kept falling, silent, cold, but not quieter than the silence now filling my apartment. I sank onto the edge of the bed, hands clasped like I was bracing for an impact that had already happened. My thoughts tangled in my head like the old cords jammed in Mom's kitchen drawer. They really went through with it, excluded me from Christmas. No drama, no yelling, just a casual erasure, like canceling a subscription. My eyes drifted to the shelf across the room. A small, framed photo. Thanksgiving 2019. Me, Mom, and Dad. I'd just landed my first full-time job at a freight warehouse. Exhausting hours, minimum pay. But I caught a 6-hour bus ride home anyway, just to sit at the table and eat Mom's dry turkey and listen to Dad rant about fantasy football. That warmth feels like another life now. I stood up, crossed the room, and opened my laptop. The wind outside howled like a stray dog circling my windows, hungry and unwelcome. I pulled up the utility dashboard, the one I'd created last winter when Mom called, saying the propane tank was near empty and the nights were getting dangerously cold. I checked the payment history. Over $2,400, 0 cents last year. Nearly $4,800, 0 cents, this year. All paid without hesitation, not because they asked, but because I thought that's what family did. Because I thought love meant doing, not being included. Until now, until I became optional. I opened the spreadsheet where I'd quietly recorded every transfer. The last entry, $400.00 in early October. A proactive payment before temperatures dropped. I doubt they even noticed. Meanwhile, Brooklyn, her sister burned through $16,000.00 of their savings trying to launch a mindful candle business. Mass-produced candles with homemade labels and a whole Instagram aesthetic. Nothing sold. Boxes piled up in their garage. No one held her accountable. They said she's young. Everyone fails sometimes. I stayed quiet and paid the bills. Brooklyn's feed still glows with latte art, weekend brunches, thrifted coats that somehow always cost $85.00, and wellness days in boutique spas, while I clock 10-hour shifts on my feet and rotate the same 3 pairs of work jeans. I hovered over the cancel auto pay button. The cursor blinked like it was asking me if I was sure. But I wasn't hesitating out of doubt. I was remembering what it felt like when I thought I mattered. And then I clicked. Service cancellation confirmed, effective December 3rd, 22 days before. I closed the laptop. Snow thickened outside, drifting like ash, the kind of slow, steady fall that buries everything over time. They wouldn't notice at first. Brooklyn would still sip her $7.00 chai. Mom would ignore the cold until the frost reached her fingertips. And Dad? He'd get mad, but he couldn't pretend I wasn't pushed out. And maybe, for once, he'd understand that I get cold too. That this time, I chose warmth. For myself. 4 days passed before I heard from Mom. Jenna, the heating system's acting up. Can you check it for me? That was the first message from Mom. No apology, no acknowledgement of the last conversation. Just maintenance. I stared at the screen for a long second, then set the phone face down on the table. I didn't reply. That night, a new text came through, from Brooklyn. No greeting, no question, just one short line. Real mature. I smirked. That was so her. Always the judge, the victim, the entitled voice of righteousness. She probably thought I'd bite, that I'd text back some long explanation or a guilt-drenched apology. Instead, I switched my phone to silent and went to bed. On the 7th day, my dad called. I let it ring until it stopped. 3 minutes later, a voicemail popped up. Jenna, I don't know what's going on. The house is down to 58 degrees. If you know anything, call me. His voice was tight, hoarse, somewhere between frustration and concern. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I grabbed my coat, walked down to the local bookstore on Lexington Street, bought a mystery novel, and took it next door to the cafe, where the heater roared and the air smelled like spiced apple pie and cinnamon. I let myself exist. On day 10, I answered a call from an unknown number. Hi, is this Miss Jenna Wallace? We're calling about the heating oil service for the residents at 143 Fair Hill Drive. The contract was under your name and we haven't heard from the homeowners. I canceled it, I said calmly, and I won't be renewing. The man hesitated, just confirming. You're not continuing payments. I looked out the window. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, blanketing the streets like powdered sugar. That's correct. By November 14th, the messages picked up speed. Mom, it's only 50 degrees. Your dad won't wear a coat and Brooklyn's coughing nonstop. Dad, this isn't about money anymore. This is family. Brooklyn, fine. Just pretend you were never part of this family. I didn't reply. I didn't delete them either. I saved them. A personal archive of where I used to pour every part of myself. And what I got back. On day 16, Asheville was hit with its first real snowstorm, the kind that halts everything, the kind the news calls historic. Warnings were issued, power outages, gusts topping 40 miles an hour. I made hot cocoa, wrapped myself in a blanket, and settled in by the window with my novel. The heater hummed steadily at my feet. I wondered if just a little, if they were huddled together in the dark living room, under blankets, trying to stay warm, if they thought of me, not as a walking wallet, but as someone who had held that household together for years, quietly, invisibly. But I didn't wait on that thought. I wasn't holding space for them anymore. On November 17th, another message came. Mom, it's 54 degrees in here. Your dad's coughing non-stop. Please, just help call someone. I placed the phone on the kitchen counter without answering. A pot of celery and potato soup simmered on the stove. The window fogged up with warmth. My little apartment felt full, safe, and mine. The temperature outside dropped to 25 degrees that afternoon. Wind scraped at the roofs like claws. But I was warm. For once, truly warm. By the 19th, Dad called 12 times. I didn't answer once. Then came the message. Call me back. This isn't a joke. I chuckled to myself. To them, I was still supposed to be the fixer, the quiet one, the reliable daughter who handled things so no one else had to. They forgot? Even kindness has boundaries. That same day, Brooklyn posted a story, her sock-covered feet, with the caption, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I didn't pity her. I didn't even feel smug. I just nodded. Exactly right, Brooklyn. You are in a freezer. One you locked yourself in the day you told me to stay away for peace. On November 21st, Mom called again. Voice raw. Jenna, it's down to 40. Your dad's sleeping in his coat. I stirred my soup, took another sip of tea, and looked at the thermostat. 73 degrees. I wasn't cold anymore. My hands are so numb I can't even do the dishes. Can you do something? That was the message from Mom. It came as I was buttering slices of sourdough for grilled cheese. The oven glowed orange, warming the kitchen, and the scent of sizzling butter filled the room. I didn't respond. That evening, I ate alone in calm silence, the occasional buzz of notifications slicing through the quiet like tiny reminders of a world I had stepped away from. Each time my phone vibrated, I glanced at the screen, then turned back to my meal. I wasn't happy they were cold, but I wasn't sad either. I was simply existing within the lines I had finally drawn after years of being treated like a backup generator for their needs. No permission asked. No thanks given. On November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, a message from Dad stopped me mid-chop while I was slicing onions. Jenna, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it. I set the knife down and stared out the window. Outside, the snow was thick on the ground. Somewhere in that frozen distance was the house where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd burned my first batch of cookies, where I had once felt part of something. But I didn't see myself there anymore. I poured more hot water into the teapot, letting the steam curl into the air. I thought of Brooklyn, who once told me I was too selfish for not funding her fashion zine project. Of Dad, who said I was too sensitive when I brought up how often I was excluded from family decisions. Of Mom, who always chose silence to keep the peace. I had been the silent one long enough. That night, I curled up on the couch with a book, wrapped in the fleece blanket I'd bought for myself last winter. The lamp cast a soft glow, and outside the wind whispered over rooftops. My phone rang. I didn't answer. Because sometimes, the only way for people to realize your worth is when you're no longer in the place they always assumed you'd be. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke before sunrise. The city was hushed under a white blanket of snow. No cars, no voices, just stillness. A peaceful reminder that winter had arrived. I made coffee, toasted bread, peeled an orange, no turkey, no stuffing, no cranberry sauce. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want the ghosts of old traditions sharing my space. At 10 a.m. I was stretched out on the couch, wrapped in warmth, sipping coffee and watching a documentary on Appalachian folk music. I felt content. I had created this space, this peace. Then the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. I peeked through the peephole. There he stood, Dad, thick gray coat, red cheeks, that same look he always wore when things didn't go his way. Not regret, just expectation. I opened the door slightly. Warm air rushed out and touched his face. Jenna, he said, we need to talk. I leaned against the frame. I don't think today's the right day to. You cut the heat, he interrupted. The house is freezing. Your mom's sick. Brooklyn's locked herself upstairs. It's 38 degrees. I held my gaze. I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. That's not the same. He blinked. The account was under your name. We didn't even know it was shut off. Because it wasn't in your name to begin with, I said. I managed it, quietly, for 2 years. Over $8,000, 0 cents. And one phone call from you erased me from dinner to protect Brooklyn's peace. He stiffened. We're out of money. We sold everything. We called the heating company. They want an upfront deposit. We don't have. Your mom's running a fever. We can't hold out much longer. Cold air slipped in through the crack in the door, brushing my legs. But I didn't move. You told me I should stay back to keep the peace for Brooklyn, I said quietly. So I did exactly that. I stayed back. Dad tugged at the edge of his hood, his eyes narrowing as the cold reddened his cheeks. You're punishing the whole family over one sentence said in frustration? I opened the door a little wider, just enough to let him glimpse the inside, the warm light spilling from the kitchen, the soft hum of the space heater, the neatly set table for one. It's not punishment, I said gently. It's just the cost of being pushed aside when I was no longer needed. He stared at me, silent for a moment, then turned without a word and walked away. His footsteps crunched through the snow as he disappeared into the night. I closed the door. The click of the lock echoed with finality. Inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee. For the first time in years, I wasn't trembling. The week after Thanksgiving, I got a call from Haley, my cousin in southern North Carolina, one of the few who still called, who didn't treat me like a shadow just because I wasn't glued to Brooklyn's orbit. Jenna, she said, the wind howling faintly through her speaker, I just talked to Aunt Celia. Things at your folks' place, they're worse than I thought. I sat at my dining table, hands wrapped around a cup of ginger tea, watching the fog build on my window. Brooklyn's moved out, Haley continued. Her boyfriend dumped her. She stayed with a friend for a while, but now she's sleeping on someone's couch in Eden Prairie. I didn't react. I wasn't surprised. Brooklyn had always floated through life expecting gravity to bend around her. But eventually, gravity wins. What about my parents? I asked, voice steady. Your mom's staying in a weekly motel near I-26, she said softly. One of those rundown ones with buzzing neon signs and thin walls. She's got a mild case of pneumonia. And Dad? Haley paused. He sold Grandpa's watch collection, the vintage one he used to polish every Sunday. He listed them online, used the money for some temporary heating oil, but it won't last long. My fingers tightened slightly around the teacup. That collection was the only thing my grandfather left behind. Each watch, a story, a memory, a symbol of dignity. Now, reduced to digital listings, waiting for strangers to click, buy now. You okay? Haley asked gently. I'm okay, I said after a beat, just sad, not for me, for how it all fell apart. I'm not, Haley replied, her voice gaining steel. You did the right thing. If people only reach out when they need something, that's not love. That's just use. We talked for a while longer about her garden, her dog, and her new job. After we hung up, I sat quietly with my phone in my lap, its screen dark and reflective. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel righteous. Just resolved. Like someone who had walked far enough to stop, turn around, and finally stop waiting for someone else to catch up. Life returned to its rhythm. Morning coffee, 7 to 3 shifts at the warehouse. Evenings at the market, buying warm bread and fresh apples. Nights spent curled up with a book, jazz spinning softly in the background. Occasionally, a call from Haley reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. Brooklyn never texted. Neither did my parents. After my dad showed up that day, the messages had stopped. Silence after so much noise. The old house on Ashwood Street? It was up for sale now. Haley sent me the listing. Faded shutters, crooked porch steps, no heat. They couldn't afford to keep it, not with winter just beginning. Sometimes I dreamt of walking back inside. I could still see the linoleum kitchen floor, the oven Mom used for pies, the dining table where Dad read the paper. But in the dream, the lights were off, the house was cold, and no one was there. I never walked in. I just looked one last time and gently closed the door behind me. I wasn't angry, truly I wasn't. But I wasn't sorry either, because I had been cold once too. The difference was, I'd learned how to build my own fire. In early December, Haley called again, laughing. "You won't believe it," she said. "Brooklyn's online, sobbing about being abandoned by her cruel sister." I smiled. "Let her talk," I said. "People believe what they want." Because I didn't need to explain any more, not when I had finally chosen myself. From simple things, from clear boundaries, from knowing that sometimes, to truly live in peace, you have to walk away and not look back. That afternoon, the snow lay thick and soft on my small balcony, covering the old lavender pot I'd meant to replant since fall. The wind was sharp, but the silence of the city in below-zero weather wrapped the streets in stillness. I was folding a freshly washed wool scarf when the doorbell rang. At first I thought it was a delivery, but then came a knock. Steady, not demanding, not urgent, just uncertain. I walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. She stood there bundled in a worn, oversized coat that nearly swallowed her. A faded scarf wrapped tight around her face. Snow clung to her shoulders, to the brim of her hat, to the seams of her sleeves. She looked small, older. I hesitated, then cracked the door just slightly, leaving a thin sliver of space between us. "Jenna," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry for just showing up, but I didn't know how long I could wait." "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "In this weather?" "I took the bus," she said, coughing lightly. "Walked the rest of the way. Took me almost an hour, but I thought, maybe you'd listen this time." I said nothing, I just waited. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, "about what happened on Thanksgiving, about everything before that. I realized I was wrong, not just for that day, but for all the years I let you carry the weight alone." Her eyes dropped to the melting snow on my doorstep. "And I never thanked you, not really. I just expected you to be there." I tilted my head. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't performing strength or pride. She wasn't defending anyone. She was just a woman trying to find her way back. "Brooklyn regrets it too," she added. "She said it should have never gone this far. That you don't owe us anything." I let out a dry laugh. Funny how people only start saying that after the support stops, after the bills go unpaid, after the silence sets in. She winced. "I'm not here to ask you to fix anything," she whispered. "I just want you to know. You matter. Whether you forgive me or not." I looked at her for a long moment. The apology came too late to stop the hurt, but maybe just in time to acknowledge it. "You chose Brooklyn," I said calmly. "When I needed support, I was told to stay back. When I paid the bills, she got the comfort. When I stopped, I was told I was punishing the family." I opened the door a little wider, not to let her in, but to let her feel the warmth inside. The light, the stillness, the quiet I had built alone. "I'm not angry anymore," I said softly, "but I'm not the same. I'm not holding this family together anymore. That role's retired." She nodded, tightening her grip on her bag. "I understand." We stood there in silence, just long enough for the cold to speak between us. Then she turned and walked away. When I closed the door, I didn't feel victorious, but I felt sure, solid, like the glow of a lamp left on for yourself, not for anyone else. I returned to the couch, resumed the jazz record I'd paused, and curled back under my blanket. By January, Asheville lay under a hush of soft snow. The city froze in silence, but I continued living in warmth. Wool socks, cinnamon tea, quiet mornings, and long, slow evenings. The apartment stayed cozy. The heater by the window never faltered. There were no more messages from Mom, no New Year greeting cards, no check-ins, and for the first time, I didn't miss them. Haley still called every week, the last thread tying me to the past. During our latest call, she sighed. "Jenna, you'll never believe this. Brooklyn posted in a community group, asking for temporary housing, said she lost her job and was trying to repair family fractures." I smiled faintly. "Let her ask," I said. "It's not mine to fix anymore." If this story spoke to something deep in you, about boundaries, self-worth, and finding peace, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's more to come. And Jenna's journey isn't over yet. Same old deflecting. I didn't say anything. I just switched my phone to speaker and kept chopping onions. The sharp smell filled the kitchen, blending with the comforting sizzle of the sauté pan. Whatever Haley was saying, it got drowned out in the warmth of that moment. Uncle Ron's trying to sell his old SUV, she said through the speaker. Apparently, he needs the cash to cover some overdue medical bills. I stirred the onions gently, listening without needing to respond. And Aunt Celia? She moved in with a cousin in Knoxville, Haley added, her voice laced with dry humor. Says she needs time to reflect on how she raised her kids. She gave a small laugh. Bit late for that, don't you think? Maybe, I said calmly, but late is still better than never. It was true. As the weeks passed, the fog had lifted from things I once clung to. Not everyone changes. Not everyone is meant to be waited on. Some bonds were never built to carry weight. Some fractures are better left untouched. Like ice, too thin to step on twice. I didn't think about Brooklyn anymore. I didn't check for her stories. I no longer felt the urge to explain myself to people who never listened. I simply lived. And each morning in this apartment, waking to the hum of the heater and the golden light across the wood floor, reminded me that this piece, I built it. Not from someone's approval, but from my own choice. By the end of January, I walked down to the used bookstore near Market Street. The owner, a kind man with ink-stained fingers, greeted me warmly. "Haven't seen you in a bit," he said. "Braving the cold again?" I smiled, picking out a novel about women who walked away from everything to start over. Back home, I made tea, placed the book on the table, and curled up near the fireplace. The flames danced across the exposed brick, flickering steady and slow. Like me. Somewhere out there, maybe the house on Ashwood Street was still freezing. Maybe they borrowed space heaters or curled up in coats. Maybe they sat in silence at a table no one had earned a seat at. But not me. I didn't belong to that anymore. The fire crackled and I sipped my tea, letting the warmth settle deep into my chest. Because I had chosen peace, and I no longer confused sacrifice with love. But the truth is, unconditional sacrifice often teaches others that your worth comes without limits. I've learned the hard way. Constantly giving doesn't make people love you more. It just makes them depend on your silence. Now, I no longer live to earn a seat at someone else's table. I've built my own. One with warmth, peace, and no need for permission. And that's the most freeing thing I've ever done. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you for walking this path with me. Sharing this wasn't easy, not because I'm ashamed, but because for a long time I believed that my silence was strength. That being the reliable one, the one who never asked for anything in return, somehow meant I was doing the right thing. But here's what I've learned. When you give everything and only receive absence in return, that's not loyalty, it's quiet self-erasure. To those of you reading this, I want to ask, what would you have done in my place? Was I wrong to draw that boundary, or was it the only way I could finally breathe on my own? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, talk to me, like I'm someone you know, because in a way, maybe you already do. And if this story reminds you of your own family, your own quiet sacrifices, let this be a gentle nudge. You're allowed to say enough. You're allowed to stop being the glue holding everyone together when no one ever asked how it felt to shatter under the pressure. You're allowed to choose peace, even if it means letting go of people who never really saw your worth. Support me by subscribing to this channel if you believe in stories like mine. Stories about standing tall after being overlooked. Stories about finding your value not through applause, but through inner peace. There are more stories coming about people who didn't walk away to hurt others, but to finally care for themselves. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk toward the life you truly deserve.